Mary Johnston-Louis, who is the Senior Fellow in Management Practice and co-director of the Oxford Leading Sustainable Corporations Programme. So Mary's also a Scholl Centre Fellow, a Senior Associate of Oxford Net Zero, and has expertise in responsible business, stakeholder governance, and leadership and business ethics. Along with his role as head tutor for the Leading Sustainable Corporations Programme, Cyrus is Emeritus Head Tutor for Oxford Strategic Innovation Programme. I put my teeth in. He's Sustainability and People Strategy Leader at Accenture and Fellow at the World Economic Forum. So just some practical arrangements before we start. A reminder that the seminar will last around an hour. It'll be an interactive session, but please could I ask you to stay on mute outside of the open discussion points. There'll be an opportunity to network in breakout sessions later on, and just to make you aware that we are recording the seminar. So I'm going to hand over to Cyrus now to get us started. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Zoe. And also thanks to Molly for all help in setting this up. Big welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us today. I know that everyone's always under immense time pressure. And so actually deciding to spend an hour with us is a choice that you make, and we really appreciate that. What we want to cover today is, as we kind of touched on, we want to focus on the Oxford Leading Sustainable Corporations Programme, which really looks at how we embed sustainability into the heart of business. What does that mean? What does that look like? And then also provides an opportunity for participants to meet, interact, etc. So we will be having some breakouts, opportunity to connect with each other and share some ideas as well. There's some very small bits of overlap with the session that we had last time, but the majority of it is all new content. So really looking forward to having a discussion about that today. And it's fantastic to have Mary joining us, who is the co-program director for this course and has an incredible wealth of expertise that I'm looking forward to sharing. To kind of kick us off and hopefully set the scene for the fact that we do want this to be interactive and we are going to be quite actively looking for your inputs, I want to start with a bit of an open question. What does sustainability mean to you? Feel free to just chuck in the chat. Or if you'd like to come off mute, put your hand up. We'd love to get your thoughts, but we'll kind of start with that. What does sustainability mean to you? This is why I like having the videos on, because I can see people furiously typing. It's not just waiting. Contributing to a world where my grandchildren will be able to thrive, giving to future generations, maintaining or improving over time, looking at the resilience of an organization. So I want to pick up on a couple of these. Maybe Ivan would love to pick up on this one. When you say to maintain or improve over time, in what sense do you mean by that?
Hi, yes. In a sense, I'm mostly just thinking about my industry is in biotechnology, and often we intersect with a lot of natural resources, the things that we do sort of have an impact on sort of the macroeconomy and also the social interaction that can come from sort of implementing these devices or chemistries. And really, when I think about sustainability, it's making sure that when we introduce new solutions that it does not pull away from the world that we try to bring it into, whether it's from the things that we require to pull into the chemistry or how we implement them.
Love that. Few people mentioning about different generations, but yeah, so having that kind of point around how we're pulling different things into different places. That sounds, that makes a lot of sense. I saw someone that's jumping up and down. Someone made a point around the resilience of an organization. I think it was Kat. I'd love to kind of, hear a little bit more. What do you mean by resilience, organizational resilience? It can mean a lot of different things to different people.
Yeah, I think if you're not careful, there is the danger of, when you're doing well as an organization, to get into this false sense of security that everything's fine, therefore you've really achieved that sort of sweet spot where your organization can not just survive but flourish in the future. And sustainability is that kick, if you like, to consider that actually just because you're doing well now, that doesn't mean that you are going to do well in the future. And in order to be a sustainable business, you really need to consider threats, dangers, opportunities, and all other things that can impact that apparent sense of prosperity at the moment. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
No, I like that, and I think there's a lot of kind of common threads, which is really good to see here around whether it's future generations, whether it's around taking a kind of multi-stakeholder, multi sort of faceted lens to your business and what it means to be successful. Mary, would love to get your thoughts on what does sustainability mean to you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Cyrus, and thank you for everyone joining. Can everyone hear me okay? It's really such a pleasure for those of you who I have met either virtually or in another session. It's really fantastic to be here. And the question is well timed in the sense that thankfully we aren't the first people to ask it. So as you know, from being in leading sustainable corporations, there's fantastic definitions that have been provided by some of our colleagues here. So Colin Mayer with his idea that sustainability is about, or purpose in his words, is about creating profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet. Or you can look at someone like a Paul Pullman with his work on net positive. So really asking the question of organizations is who and what within the world is better off because your business is in it. So I think there's a lot in those definitions. I really like that way of thinking. Richard Barker and I, who are the co-directors of this course, we are actually publishing a book in September. So watch this space if you're looking for some more sustainability reading. We're publishing the Financial Times Guide to Leading Sustainable Corporations. And you know, as you always must, we've got our own kind of way of thinking about this. And I'll just pop it in the chat just so that you can kick it around and see what you think. So our thinking is as follows. It's really that corporations are embedded entities. They don't exist outside of the environments and the context in which they operate, right? So whether that's within their transactional environment, the employees, the customers, the direct investors that they work with, or in their contextual environment. So those entities, whether it's government or their social license to operate, that exist kind of one concentric circle outside of their day-to-day. So this is kind of how we landed on this definition, which I'm really happy to hear kind of your thoughts and how it lands with you. It's this idea that corporations are embedded and they also need to create profitable products and services in order to endure and create value. But the real ticket and what we feel is really an exciting transition for corporations to reach for at this stage, and very few are there, right, is to do that value creation while strengthening the natural and social systems on which they rely, right? And so every company, all of us in all of our day-to-day life do rely on social systems, so the ways that our societies work or support the humans within them, and also on natural systems. And so the two that we focus on most strongly in leading sustainable corporations is on the natural system of carbon, so looking at carbon and carbon emissions, and then the natural system of nature itself, of biodiversity and natural resources. So I think there's something around looking at the way that companies generate value while at the same time, at minimum, not depleting and ideally even enhancing the systems on which they rely. And I love that this long-term perspective is coming in as well. I think that maybe one thing our definition doesn't include is anything about time horizons or long-termism or specifically about the future. And I love that that's coming through. I think that, Ed, you put it so well, just thinking about the kind of world that one's grandchildren might want to live in, might have to live in, actually. So yes, something I've been thinking about quite a bit, Cyrus. I hope that's some food for thought and maybe further discussion.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that because I love this definition. The one thing I would have added is for current and future generations at the end.
Super.
Something to think about.
Yeah, something to think about. There we go. I love that.
Ajay, love to get your thoughts.
While I tend to agree with the essence of the definition, but what I would like to state here is, am I interpreting this correctly, is something that I would really like to understand. When you're saying that you're creating the products and services while taking care of the natural and social systems, does it not sort of look like as if, oh, it is a byproduct there and it's sort of, you know, you're doing a corporate social responsibility kind of an initiative of focusing on your natural and social systems? Rather, the way I see sustainability is, should you not be building in those, things around the natural and social systems and embed that as a part of your business operations itself, rather than actually taking it as a separate CSR initiative, if you may.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call. And I think it's interesting. I think we're saying the same thing. And actually it's interesting that the words we're using didn't land that way with you, because for us, actually the core piece, and you'll see that through the Leading Sustainable Corporations program, and also through hopefully the work that we do in the book, is that it has to be core to the operations. I mean, one of the biggest threats I think that we see to this space, frankly, is defaulting to CSR, like you said. And also the threat of moving into the space of sustainability really with a kind of compliance first mindset. Compliance is important, but it's not where the business innovation and the core business change will come. And so I think that's really, really helpful feedback, and really value your comment. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess I can see how you could read that while as being sort of alongside, as opposed to, I think where definitely, Mary, I know your mindset is going is what I'm sort of thinking of is creates profitable products and services in a way that also strengthens natural and social systems.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
cool.
No,
Ed.
really, spot on, 100%.
Edward.
I just wanted to sort of look at the distinction between, because the question said, what does sustainability mean?
Sure.
And the definition that we've just been looking at is all about a sustainable corporation. Now, corporations are obviously only a part of the big picture of, sustainability in general, which is massively, in my opinion, about consumer behavior. It's about government policy. Obviously, a lot of this kind of overlaps with the corporation, but it's way beyond the corporation. Corporations can do a certain amount, but if you take the word sustainability as it was put in the question, it's actually a much bigger thing.
Absolutely. Excellent point, Ed. Absolutely.
It is. And actually that leads us very nicely onto the next couple of slides, which exactly talks to that point. So maybe I'll kind of move on to, I think, lovely kickoff for the discussion. And I think what I want to kind of pull out here, which people have already touched on, is really sustainability and innovation. Sort of bringing those two pieces together is how society is evolving, or how society needs to evolve in the way that will be sustainable for the future. Research shows that trillions of dollars need to be invested every year to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, quick show of hands, and this is always interesting to see, how many people have heard of the UN SDGs, UN Sustainable Development Goals? Just quick hands up. Maybe if we can use the hands up feature. And no shame if you haven't. Just interested to see. Okay, so about half or so, and then there's a few that haven't. So the UN, and Mary, you maybe keep me honest here, but it was about the 2000 Sustainable Development Goals, or 2015 they launched them, I believe. Anyway, about 10 years ago or so, they launched this set of 17 goals, ranging from end poverty, create gender equity, reduce inequalities, preserve life on land, preserve sea, etc. This kind of huge, big goals that we as a society needed to address in order to achieve that kind of broader, I think, Edward, to your point, the kind of broader sustainability that we need for society. A lot of companies now, and you may kind of recognize some of these like yellow, some of these colored boxes in financial reports, company reports, etc., because a lot of them are now using this as a way of articulating how the work that they do ties to a broader definition of impact and systems change that they're trying to address. There are challenges with the SDGs as a framework as well. They're not always very well defined. The metrics within them are not always the easiest to understand. But again, it's a language that's being used. So it's worth thinking about your own organization and to what extent could you align the work that you're doing to one or more of the SDGs as a way of thinking about the impact that you have on society. But the point to say here is that those organizations that can really weave together sustainability with innovation, and very often digital innovation, are the ones that are able to actually unlock not only the sort of risk mitigation that we touch on, but also the kind of competitive advantage and new way of doing business that will allow you to actually sort of survive in the future. But what does this mean? And this now touches on, this goes beyond just a single organization. We're really looking at a top to bottom retooling of what success means. So starting from the kind of global economy and governments, how do we rate or how do we define success from a government? Very often it's about GDP and GDP growth specifically. That's not saying that jobs and inflation and growth is in itself a bad thing, but how are we also combining that with rating our governments on how well they are quantifying that performance to business, stakeholders, citizens in terms of healthcare, climate change, education, etc., which in a lot of cases we don't hold to account as much as perhaps we could be. The impact, therefore, that then has on the capital markets. So at the moment, very much, and this is changing, but still, financial returns are the key drivers of the cap markets, of what drives share price, etc. We are moving towards a world where your carbon footprint could have an impact on your share price, where the social value that you create or destroy could have an impact on your share price, etc. So how that then, in fact, impacts investment decisions, capital allocations, is a key part of changing the overall system, which therefore helps us to think about what is the role that the chairs, CEOs, and boards have in setting the strategy and being held accountable for strategy at the very top of the house. We're not doing away with all the normal expectations for business performance, as Mary's already touched on. We still need sort of organizations that are creating profitable products and services, but also doing that in a way that produces a kind of, whether you talk about ESG impact, whether you talk about sustainable impact, whatever it is, a strategic plan, delivery, measurement, and performance of that impact alongside the business. Which therefore, when you're now thinking about it from an organizational perspective, needs a new type of organizational capability where you're not only looking at backwards reporting, but also how you're looking at real-time decisions, and not just about financial products, but also about your emissions, your community impact, etc., in a way that allows you to make real-time decisions, and therefore thinking about the kind of leadership development, learning capabilities that you need, behaviors that you need within an organization to make yourself successful. I'm going to pause here for a second. Any reflections or comments or thoughts?
I can jump in, Cyrus, just to build a link on the SDGs, which you led off with, just as folks are thinking about this kind of 5-step or 5-stage kind of set of areas of change, and also change goes at different rates within those different spaces, right? And so I think the SDGs came out of something called the Millennium Development Goals. So the Millennium Development Goals were launched sort of at the United Nations level in 2000, and moved basically at 2015, as Cyrus said, to a set of goals that have a 2030 end date, if you will. Now, one thing that we all, I think, are quite aware of is that, of course, we are massively behind on where we need to be for these goals. And that matters because what I love to do when I'm working with companies specifically is to have them look at this list of sustainable development goals and just go around the room and just have folks identify and connect with the areas that their business directly touches on the specific goals, right? And we usually get within even, in a given business, there will be, 3 to 4, or sometimes one that's very deep, where the link is very, very strong. And I think what's interesting is to think about this as people often refer to it as kind of the world's to-do list, which I think is an interesting way to think about it. But the reason I think it has a lot of use in our conversation around sustainability as it pertains to the corporate space is essentially it's very difficult for companies to address systemic issues, right? So to the point that Ed raised earlier, to build a sustainable world, a sustainable society, right? A sustainable environment, no single company can do that on their own. And so what I think is really helpful is to have a basis through which we begin to think, where do we put our priorities, right? If you have to make trade-offs, if you have to begin to focus, where do you start that process? And so what I think, with all the challenges and the difficulties, or in some ways the weaknesses of something like the SDGs, it is the closest thing that we have to a kind of global consensus that talks about where we want to go for our grandchildren, right? And so it's not that we're putting it out there as a perfect framework, but I think what it is a very powerful tool for prioritization. And I think when companies enter this space, prioritization and how to navigate trade-offs is actually very fundamental. And so beginning with that mapping exercise of where is your impact deepest within this list of 17, and where is the low-hanging fruit where you really could generate value and begin to deliver progress on one or more of these areas, I think that's the kind of way I've seen companies use these goals in a way that's quite powerful. And I think that leads quite nicely, Cyrus, to your next slide, kind of with the 5 categories. Because if we think about the levers of those 5 categories, they map on quite nicely to the 17 SDGs, right? If you think about the role that each of the entities within these categories can play. And so it's a messy process. It's full of innovation. It's full of trial and error. It's full of experiment. But I think what's really beautiful about it is the fact that it has the clarity that companies really need in order to prioritize and say, yes, we're going to do this and not that, because we can't do them all, right? And I think that's the way I've seen businesses use them in the most effective manner. So yes, over to you though, Cyrus, or over to the group. I know you've now had a bit more time to think about the 5 categories Cyrus presented. So just wanted to share that by way of background thought.
No, it's a great one. And there's been a question here around the role that governance plays. So, environmental impact is fairly clear, social impact, clear. When we're talking about governance, what exactly does that look like? And I've kind of started in the chat with, some thoughts around, your board structure, your KPIs, your compensation, data usage, privacy, all those sorts of things, the kind of processes, policies, ways of working that underpin your organization. Is all kind of part of the governance. But maybe to the rest of the group as well, I'd love to get other people's thoughts on how does governance play a part, because I think it is a critical part in kind of the organizational wiring that drives sustainable outcomes. Alberto.
Yes, I think it's critical because it's part of the commitment of the company. If there is not commitment of the top, just maybe we're going to have some measures and some reports and numbers, but there won't be a real commitment of the company. And I think the management has to establish the purpose of the company and the commitments related to sustainability. For example, in the company where I work at, there is a CSO. That's the position that typically has the companies, right? With has the head of the sustainability. But beyond that is the way all the people around at the top level are really working on that in that direction. If not, just something, I don't know how to say this, cosmetic, or greenwashing or things like that happens is very common here in my country. So I think governance is really critical to advance in the in the sustainable objectives of the corporations.
That's great. Thank you for starting. Any other thoughts on the importance of governance? And I think one thing I'd love to build on is having a CSO is great, and many companies don't even have that. It's interesting to think about what enables a CSO to be successful versus not, because I've also seen cases where you put a CSO in place, but perhaps they don't have the budget, the team, the relationships, the senior level, whatever, to be successful. So that's also something to think about. Edward, or Ed, which you prefer?
Ed's fine. I only get called Edward when I've done something really bad, and my wife, Edward. Yeah, I just sort of talk about measurements and KPIs in this context, and I suppose kind of take it back to the 17 overall goals. What work has been done on the goals in terms of establishing some credible performance indicators that will show us where we are on the track, on track on all these? Because I mean, they're great ambitions, they're lofty ambitions. How do you measure it with any degree of accuracy to work out, and going back to governance and the CSO role and so on, it strikes me again, you've got to have very clear objectives and measurement tools in place, to give the whole thing any credibility.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, and then I know Mary will have more to build. But so within the SDGs themselves, there are metrics and KPIs,
right?
But they are, from my perspective, rather complicated, and not always that entirely clear, or in some cases sort of conflicting in some ways. So it can be very difficult to align to that. And the SDGs is also one of many of the so-called alphabet soup of sustainability standards and reporting standards that have been out there. So I think if you're looking for standards to really kind of adhere to at the moment, where it feels like is there's some convergence around the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, which some of you may be familiar with, but was essentially convened under the auspices of the IFRS. So the body that sets international accounting standards is now setting international sustainability reporting standards. And that's a very deliberate choice to basically say, we need to put the same level of rigor, credibility, controllership around sustainability reporting as we do around accounting and financial reporting. So a number of bodies have already either amalgamated into the ISSB or have, gracefully sort of ended their activities in favor of the ISSB, because that is the sort of emerging sort of view of where standards are going. And ideally, standards become regulation, and with regulation, you get some teeth. So, at the moment, many sustainability reports are sort of produced by marketing functions. No disrespect to marketing functions, but there's not always the same level of rigor in a marketing report that goes into a financial report. But actually now what we're seeing a lot is integrated reporting, where marketing, finance come together to actually produce a report that has the flow, the storytelling, and the kind of engagement that you see within a marketing report, but also has the financial level of rigor to any kind of sustainability claim in that report as well. Hopefully that kind of starts to make sense. Mary, good to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I see we have a hand from Kat, so I'll be super quick and just say I popped one of my favorite resources on the SDGs into the chat. It's called the SDG Impact Tracker, and it's actually by a team based here in Oxford, which is really, really nice, very clean in terms of looking at what kind of data is being analyzed and looking at progress over time. I find it probably the most easy to use resource, drilling down into each of the 17 SDGs. And of course, the ability to measure, for example, levels of hunger differs from the ability to measure, for example, levels of gender empowerment, right? So there are some measures that are more or less easily captured by quantitative metrics. Nevertheless, I think that there's actually a team here in Oxford who's done some incredible work on quantifying women's empowerment as an indicator, particularly in the agriculture sector. So that's a team I'll pop in the chat as well. They're led by a woman who's an amazing scholar named Sabina Alkir. And so, metrics are imperfect, of course they are, but at the same time, we do have the ability to look at progress and to identify where things are moving in a direction that is aligned with the goals and where the pace is too slow. And so I really recommend that SDG Impact Tracker. Fantastic. And
I've not seen that, and I'm happily shown to be wrong on the SDGs being actually a great tool for tracking.
No,
so thanks, Barry.
You're no, Cyrus, on the contrary, you're not wrong. The ability to capture these
is tough
areas of progress in quantitative metrics is sometimes conceptually impossible, right? In the sense that how would I compare my level of empowerment to yours in the way that both of us found coherent, right? So these kinds of issues are extremely difficult to capture. Nevertheless, I think the SDG Impact Tracker is a really great resource to begin to drill down. I think what you can't do is perhaps create consensus about perfect metrics. I think what you can do is create strong claims around directionality and progress or lack thereof. So, Kat, I want to pass over to you because I know you've been very patient.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the governance aspect of it and how actually it ties into very nicely to what you both talked about in terms of the motivation to carry on and to do more when you know that you have had some impact, and you can, for lack of better sort of metric, KPIs are helpful in that, whether they're driving qualitative or quantitative sort of impact. I work in education, and I think because of the governance element of our organization, actually we have been driven to establish a sustainability module for all our employees. So it's a tiny sort of actionable, sustainable sort of progress that we have developed in the same way as all our employees are doing a health and safety sort of training or mandatory type safeguarding training. So for me, that's what governance type commitment to sustainability would translate into organizations. And I just wanted to give that as an example. And again, we sought out partnership and input from specialists in the area so that to develop a viable module. But that is something that has been added at the top of our agenda in mandatory training, which I haven't heard of many other educational organizations doing that, or indeed other organizations. So I just thought I'd offer that as an example where governance does have an impact in this area.
No, that's great. And I think you touched on something that I want to make sure is very clear. You made it mandatory, right? I think the distinction between what an organization chooses as mandatory training versus optional training, that is a governance choice. And that I think wanted to call that out as a really great distinction as well. Thank you. I'm just going to move us on for a couple of other concepts, and then I also want to make sure we leave a decent amount of time for you all to have a bit of a chat as well. I'm sure people are familiar with this sort of idea of upstream, downstream, but really, I guess when we're looking at a sort of what it means to be a sustainable organization, the key is you do have to look beyond your own operations. And some people may be familiar with this idea of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 when we talk about emissions. Scope 1 essentially is from a carbon and footprint perspective, is the resources that are used in the course of direct activities of your business. Scope 2 is essentially energy that's used through external providers, basically what you buy. And then scope 3 is the bit outside. So the upstream, downstream, it's the emissions generated through either through kind of raw materials coming into your business, or the emissions of your products and services as they go out through the rest of your value chain. I kind of remember it as scope 1, what you burn, scope 2, what you buy, scope 3, everything else, at a very kind of simplistic level. But the key thing is now many organizations have got a bit better handle on their scope 1 and scope 2, but are really struggling with scope 3 as a concept, as a way of measuring it, because it's not always in your control. Banks is an interesting example. I do a fair amount of work within financial services. where for them, their biggest source of emissions is the emissions of the investments that they make. They're so-called financed emissions. It's about 90+% of their sort of full emissions looking across scope 1 and scope to scope 3 is in financed emissions. It's the impact of the initiatives that they're financing. And this is something that banks are only very recently trying to grapple with. And then I can see someone's touched sort of or put in the chat the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And this is this idea where many companies now are setting this, right, we're going to be net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050, whatever it is. I kind of say slightly flippantly, it's the easiest thing in the world to set a net zero by 2050 target. You just do it and you just say it. The difficult thing, and this is where many companies are really struggling, is to understand what is the science-based glide path to achieve that net zero by X date. And therefore, what do you need to do by end of 2024, by 25, by 26, etc. Because we've seen a lot of organizations, well, not a lot, but in many, setting these net zero by 2050 targets at a point where the CEO, the C-suite that are setting that, the board that are setting that, they're not going to be around. So how much accountability do they really take for that target? Not a huge amount. But if they're setting those interim milestones to say, right, by 25, we're doing this, by 2030, we're doing this, where they will be around, that's what then adds the credibility. And that's frankly where the challenge lies. I'm going to just skip to this one here. So it's another concept that some people may have seen but wanted to share from the course around this idea of planetary boundaries and donut economics, or otherwise known as Goldilocks economics. So how do we actually think about our usage of natural resources and services in a way that keeps us within the limits of the resources that we have, while still putting in and providing enough foundations to meet the social needs of the population that we have? Because really the most sort of environmentally sustainable thing is to have no people. Right? If we had no people, we'd have no industrial activity, we'd perfectly meet our environmental goals. But obviously we need to meet the needs of people. We have a society that we want to maintain, but we can't just focus on that without having that ceiling as well. So this idea of donut economics is one that's taking off in a number of different places. I think it was the Netherlands has really focused on this as a kind of real model for setting their economic policies and how they think about waste, how they think about climate, how they think about their investments, urban planning, etc. So it's really interesting to think, even from an organizational perspective and the remits that you have, how can you be thinking about the sort of Goldilocks level that would work for you? We've actually touched on quite a lot about governance KPIs, so I'm not going to do this, but the last thing I want to do before we move into breakouts is touch on this sort of perception gap that really often exists between executives and stakeholders, employees. And I'm sure this is something that intuitively you're familiar with, which is where people who are generally more senior, maybe the ones setting the targets, maybe the ones setting the strategies, feel like they are really kind of going at it. They've got credible targets around planning, executing, measuring for sustainability. And then the people who are perhaps a little bit further away, a few more levels removed, just do not feel the same. And that perception gap can really influence people's engagement, the credibility that you have with the stakeholders that you're working with. And then that can actually have a knock-on impact on the performance of the organization if you feel like there's this disconnect between what your senior leaders are saying and what you're hearing. What's interesting is that gap could be a perception gap, a comms gap, or it could be a reality gap. And what's interesting is to really think about, do people think that we're not doing as well because genuinely our reality just isn't reflecting the rhetoric? Or are we not doing well? Do we feel like we're not doing well because we're not hearing it? But actually there's loads of great work happening in other areas of our organization that we're just not aware of. Mary, anything else that you want to sort of add here?
Yeah, I popped a couple of resources in that I think it would be really helpful to gather these up and share them with you guys afterwards, because I think it takes time to kind of work through each of these pieces one by one. And that's what we hope we can give you a little bit of a deep dive here right now. So, I mean, what we know for sure is that particularly on decarbonization, there is a gap between what organizations and particularly companies have committed to do. So about 65% of the world's annual revenue, corporate revenue of the world's 2,000 largest companies is now covered by a net zero target in some form, right? And there's been a massive increase of these targets in the last kind of 2 to 5 years. The challenge is that many of them, and I'm talking about something around probably 4 to 5% of those targets that have actually been assessed in terms of their integrity and credibility and alignment with a business transition plan, actually meet that criteria for being high integrity in terms of the claim. And so I think in many cases, there's probably parts of the business, it might be on packaging, it might be on treatment of employees, it might be on use of natural resources, where actually, you know, companies are, and perhaps even your individual firm is providing leadership, but particularly on decarbonization, the speed with which the commitments are coming through and the speed with which the business transformation is happening is misaligned. And so I think that's where the kind of tension that you're pulling out here, Cyrus, is really important. And I think it's something that we feel is really crucial to actually empower executives and to empower employees, who are the ones who will deliver on this in their operations and through their sets of incentives to which they work, to have a credible transition plan, right? And so the UK actually has an excellent resource on transition planning. So the TPT, it's the Transition Plan Task Force here in the UK. I mean, there's many really very, very solid approaches, but the Transition Plan Task Force is one that we know well, and actually it is quite comprehensive, looking at everything from finance to planning to strategy and execution. So I think that what we often pick up is that there is that gap that you're seeing here on this slide. And then there also is the gap of organizations just understanding the momentous nature of the challenge ahead in order to deliver on these goals. And I think that's where the more we can get these tools into the right hands and really begin to help teams to become familiar with them, to become really confident in their ability to deliver and clear on where they do need support. I think that's the work. We're in that sort of implementation and delivery phase. So I think that's probably for us what's most exciting, and hopefully matches where many of you are as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mary. We're now going to put you guys into breakouts just to get a chance to sort of chat between yourselves and reflect on the conversations that we've had. We'll have 7 minutes in small groups. Please do, if you can, stay till the end. We've got some final notices and sort of exciting events coming up that we'd love to make sure you guys are familiar with. But if you really are struggling or during the time, Molly's kindly putting some links in the chat, and would love it if you could share your feedback as well. But yeah, so 7 minutes. We're going to go into breakouts now, and then we'll just wrap up at the end for the last couple of minutes, where we've got some exciting exclusive events for our alumni that we'd love to share with you. And I'll put this in the chat. But if you just share, you know, kind of who you are, where you're working. It was just too fun. I guess first thing is just a huge thank you to you all for taking the time to join us today. Mary, do you want to just share a little bit about this course?
Yes, absolutely. Please. That would be so fantastic. So it's something that is so new that you guys are actually the first to see it. So this is a program that's launching a 1-week in-person program. So not online, which is new for us. We really built the sustainability work at the school online for obvious reasons, scale, accessibility, also financial, also climate for it, to be honest. But we feel that there is a value in being in person. And we actually try to be quite thoughtful about that in terms of when we are bringing people, why are we bringing them, and what's the difference that that would make? Because it is a very big commitment in terms of climate and impact. So the page has not been found. Kat, you're right. That's correct, because you are the first people to see this. This went live about an hour ago, so we thought it would be fun to share it. But if you, it will, the proper page will be in your follow-up links, along with all the other links that have been mentioned. And so panic not if the QR code's not working or anything like that. But the whole idea of this course is really to bring individuals and teams together to think about how do you move from seeing sustainability, net zero, that set of issues as a compliance, as something that's actually quite a big burden to your business, to something that can generate value and can be a real source of innovation. So we're really excited about it here in October. So thrilled to have you guys follow up with me about that. Or of course, I'm sure the whole team would be delighted, but I'm really, really looking forward to welcoming a cohort here in Oxford who are wanting to bridge that gap between what's we know is good, but what can actually be done in our businesses. So thanks so much. Really fun to have you guys be the first ones to see it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mary. And we mentioned there was a chat in our group as well around, how do you pick up the language just to be able to get familiar with it? And a course like this would be fantastic. Or if you can't make it in person in Oxford, Molly's already pinged the link to our Leading Sustainable Corporations program, which would be great if people haven't done it, to just get familiar with the language, key concepts, etc., which we've touched on. But obviously you can only go through so much in a 1 hour session. So I think with 1 minute to go, Zoe, maybe hand over to you, and a big thank you from me.
Thank you. And thanks so much, Cyrus and Mary, for such a fantastic session. It was great to have it so interactive, people joining in. It's fantastic. And some really good conversations in the breakout room. So as Mary said, we'll gather all the links together that we put in the chat today, along with a short post-event survey, and we'll send that to you as a follow-up. I want to say thank you as well to Molly, our Alumni Events Officer, for arranging this. And in our growing program of events for alumni, as Cyrus said, we've got an exclusive events program now, which is up and running. So there's this online series, and there's some upcoming in-person opportunities as well. Our networking drinks in London on the 11th of July. I hope some of you will be able to join us for that. Booking has opened for that. The Alumni Reunion Weekend, it was so popular last year, we put it across 1.5 days this time, on the 5th and 6th of October at the business school. So booking will open for this in the coming weeks, but please save the date. Thank you very much. So just remains for me to say thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at future alumni events. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great to see everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. We would receive recording from this, would we?
Yes. Yeah, we'll be able to share the recording for this and for the last event as well. So
yeah, no problem.
that round. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, have a nice weekend. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice. Bye.
Well done, team.
Thank
That
you.
was
Thank
Should we stop the recording?
Yes, 2 seconds. Sorry. There we go. Cool.